to Comic Books and You. Today we're going to talk about Rob Liefeld's Warchild, which is a 1994 comic from the Maximum imprint, Maximum Press, which is extremely small. I haven't found that much information on that particular publisher slash sub-publisher. So this is a bit of a weird bird, but we're going to go over it. You'll see that there isn't much to do, even though that's 4 numbers in one trade paperback. We're going to be able to go over this over 30 slides, so it's a pretty simple little thing to look at. Where did I pick this up? Well, I went to Montreal on a day trip. Went to one of my favorite comic book slash gaming store in Laval, and they have a deep discount rack for trade paperbacks and a few art covers actually for French bande dessinée. And basically, it's any book on there for $5. And there were 2 copies of this trade paperback. They've been there since forever, since that trade paperback dates from 1996, 1995, 1996. I didn't check the exact publication date in it, but it's basically been there rotting on the rack. The bag in which it was sealed was basically falling apart when I ripped it open. It's one of those books with no names attached to it. We've got Rob Liefeld, obviously, and a few others, but nothing else rings a bell as far as that comic goes in my personal experience, either as a old-time comic reader when I was reading far more in the 90s or more recently. It's not a thing that you can look up online and find all sorts of information on either. It's one of those forgotten books from the 90s. I'm going to repeat it here. Don't expect anything deep or anything profound as far as an analysis goes here. There's nothing deep to analyze about this book. Roughly put, if you want to go there, it's an isekai and an Arthurian retelling. That's about it. So nothing out of the ordinary. And this video is not going to drive the sales of this particular comic, I am sure. Our main character is Sword, as you can see here. He's supposed to be I would say, older teenager or young adult. You can clearly see that from his stature here. That's a very standard teenager look there. He's our King Archer stand-in. He's an orphan kid with a destiny. All we really have. He was raised in the court of a medieval kid, and he was bullied by the other kids, except for the daughter of the king, who was basically in love with him. He was cast out as the king was murdered, and the murder was pinned on him, and he ran off. He is a fairly strong physical fighter. He has a lot of willpower and physical fitness, and he's got a magic sword, which he needs to go and recover from a modern city. That's our isekai element here, a man traveling to another world. Our second character is the cyborg Stone. So we go from a fantasy element to a sci-fi element. He's a cyborg from the New West. Once again, don't ask any questions because we don't get an answer. There was a war with the Black Knight, who's our main villain. The war was turning bad and he decided to go back home instead of continue to fight, but his family was killed by the Black Knight and he fell into despair before joining with our hero Sword. Sword in the Stone. You know, it's very, very deep and profound there. He's equipped with various weapons in his arms as a cyborg. He's got jump jet. He's self-repairing, so he doesn't need anything fancy to repair him. A bit of an interesting character, but we really don't get much out of him in these 4 numbers. So we have him with the glasses, and we have him here in a combat pose where we can see like arm cannons, and you can see that it's a clearly 90s experience right there. Our next character is Merlin, who's a powerful wizard, and we see him in his traditional form in one flashback, but for most of the book, we see him/her presented as a young girl. She grows up throughout the story. This is in the middle of the story where she basically now looks like a young adult. When we really start the story, she looks like a probably 8 to 10-year-old child. He saved Sword as his mother was dying and then gave him to the king, nondescript there. That's his main or her main role in the story, I would say. So we have here him in his traditional Merlin form. Our next character is Gwendolyn, which is Sword's love interest, the daughter of the king. She dies as she flees the castle with sword after her father's murder, and the Black Knight appears to try to usurp the throne. That's what we get. When she dies, she merges with sword, and after making a deal with Death to give him a certain number of souls per moon. So it's a interesting idea there, but it's once again not something that is fully researched or fully followed through in this story. Our bad guy is the Black Knight. We'll go with something very complex here. He's an evil wizard warrior hybrid. He doesn't have any morals. He's clearly evil. He has a horde of evil minions, including Morgana and some weird bear demon and a weird red demon guy. But he is capable of fighting himself, so they're basically roadblocks for our heroes. I suppose he's a human, and that's about what we know of him. We'll go through the story, so you'll see what I'm talking about here. So we have a wizard called the Vizier who sends Sword, Stone, and Merlin back to our present, which is the future of Sword and the past of Stone, from what I understand. The Black Knight catches up with him, they get into a fight, and he kills the Vizier. Our heroes land in 1995 Los Angeles, and they're trying to find Sword, which is kept in a museum. So that is the first quest. Stone flies them there using his jetpack, and after messing a little bit with the local guards, the rent-a-cops, two of the rent-a-cops turn into those two monsters, and they get into a fight with the two monsters. Sword with the red horned demon, and Stone with the bear-like demon in the back there. We get Stone's backstory in a short flashback, while Sword recovers his magic weapon, and Gwendolyn's spirit destroys the monster he is fighting through sheer magic power. Morgana teleports where our heroes are. They flee to the roof, and as they're fighting there, they're going to fall off. And one of the Black Knight's monster chops off Stone's hand. They start falling, and he starts trying to fly them away with his remaining energy. But they get captured by the Black Knight, and we get into his fortress. Sword defeats the behemoth that we see here in maybe 2 panels. And then he faces the Black Knight, Morgana, and everything together. He rescues his allies from captivity while this is going on. And they get together to fight the Black Knight and Morgana. Morgana gets killed as Sword calls back his weapon to himself after he threw it to kill one of the other Black Knight minions. Black Knight is fairly injured, but he is still overpowering our heroes. And the Black Knight at that point breaks the gem in Sword's sword, which releases Gwendolyn, which in return triggers Death coming looking for her and taking over our villain, breaking his concentration and breaking his defensive power long enough for Sword to stab and kill him. And that's basically the end of the story. This was 88 pages in a very quick resume, and honestly, I haven't really skipped anything. This is a super short and sweet story with a few flashbacks that I've explained in the character section, so there isn't much to it. The trade paperback that I have here does include the picture of each of the covers for the original floppies, so we are going to look at them. Those would draw the attention of readers, especially in that particular era where this is the peak of the extreme 90s, where Rob Liefeld was basically the iconic master of that art. So I mean, just looking at even this particular cover, you might not know what you're getting into, but you know what you're buying. Basically, you're buying that extreme 90s action and basically violence that came with it. The second cover does have Merlin in the back there. That's probably my favorite of all those covers because this here is a little bit more open. I think anybody who would see this would be attracted to it, and it would give you. This is the kind of cover I would use personally if I was running a longer series with these characters. Something that shows our main character in his willpower and his strength, and another character in the back in a more supportive role. Number 3 is not a bad cover either. I'm not as big of a fan of it as cover for number 2, but once again, it still sells that 90s aesthetics. And the final one is probably the worst of the lot, as a close-up shot with the Black Knight and sword. This would be the one where it wouldn't attract most people's attention. It's not terrible, honestly, but I can understand if people were not excited for that particular cover. The good news is this particular trade paperback has very good paper quality. It's not falling apart at all. There's no bleeding, nothing of the sort. It's pretty much equal to the quality of what I would point as the pinnacle right now of quality, which would be ISOM number 1. Very, very good paperback in my opinion, except for the cover. The cover itself, that bit is a little bit cheaper, honestly, but trade paperbacks are not meant to be, super, super high quality in a way, which is a thing that I'm never a huge fan of. This is an old book that I got under really cheap, but it's still in a very good shape. It's not brittle, it's not discolored, so I'm pretty happy with it. The color palette we have in it is vibrant, which is what I would expect from one of those 1990s extreme style comics. Don't have any ads or anything of the sort in the trade paperback. I don't intend to undown the floppies for this. As far as artistic merit goes, this is literally the extreme 90s. You have that shot here with our characters bristling with muscles, pouches. There's nothing outside of this that doesn't say that period of the 90s. The character art goes from pretty darn good, like this Morgana here. She doesn't look completely anorexic like we have in some of those 90s comics in general. We have a few of those that look pretty good. And then we fall to the what the hell is this category, like here with Sword, where it's just too over the top. So we have that full range here of quality. The poses themselves range from normal to bone breaking. It doesn't work as well as some people think. Example here on the left, we've got decent enough poses. Of course, that's a cover, but still. And in this other picture here, we have that jump kick. Sword is giving the Orn Demon, and I have no idea how the posture and how the perspective works in this particular panel. Facial expression go from pretty good to good. Of course, we are in that extreme 90s period, so you've got those extreme grit poses in some cases, but overall, they're not awful. I do feel like whoever the author is doesn't know how to draw kids, unfortunately. The facial expression in the various section where we see Sword and Gwendolyn as kids are not that great. Same with Merlin when she is much younger. The panel work, however, is really good. No pages are boring to look at. They're at the screen, well, the page real estate is really well used throughout. And we've got nice bleeding panels. We've got nice double page panels. So everything is meant to draw your attention. The backgrounds as well are generally good and they improve the mood of the story. We've got very few basic backgrounds, blank backgrounds, or gradient backgrounds. And even when we do, there's stuff overlaid over it, butterflies, plants, things like that. So it actually is an interesting thing to look at. Story elements, however, let's go through that because there's a few things to talk about. This is a modern Arthurian retelling, which I would consider a rite of passage for most Western creators. You either do an Arthurian retelling or the Three Musketeers. That's what you end up doing as a creator 95% of the time. Everybody does it in their own way, and that's normal. Same with our Asian authors. If we were to look to the East, we've got a lot of Asian authors that will redo The Journey West or Romance of the Three Kingdoms in their own way. I believe this is just something that ends up happening naturally, and people might not notice it, but that's how it is. Is there anything special, revolutionary in this book? No, absolutely not. I think this is the safest story I have read in a long time. I'm trying to think here of other recent stories that I've seen, but we don't have any major twists. We don't have any major turns. We don't have any incredible revelations. It's an extremely linear and straightforward story, and all of our characters are what we expect them to be. We've got the merging of a sci-fi element with a cyborg, fantasy element with the knights. It's pretty good and seamless here. We don't have, like, sometimes in these situations where we have that weird idea air where one doesn't fit the other. But we do have an unfortunate side effect here. The magic elements, they don't require a lot of explanation because it's magic, it just works. It's easy for us to suspend our disbelief when we're dealing with magic because magic is something that is supernatural and we have no other means than suspending our disbelief to believe it works. We don't need an explanation as to how death merges Gwendolyn's soul into sword because it's magic, it just works. The problem is when we have sci-fi elements at the same time, those sci-fi elements require explanation. That's a side effect of sci-fi, a side effect of gear porn that we know and love. We want those explanations. In this case here, almost all of it, or I would say actually all of it, is ignored. All we know is Stone is a cyborg. He's from the New West, and that's it. We don't know what that means. We don't know how that happened. We don't know anything particular. That's just how it is. You could literally remove Merlin from the story. You would not lose anything. Same with Morgana. Morgana's just a random roadblock for our characters. Removing her would probably give us 2 or 3 more pages of the Black Knight as our villain, where we could be using it as an expansion of why he's our bad guy, other than he's just evil. This here is a vanity project. It's not a project that was market and analyzed. It's not a project that was researched in depth to create something profound or to give a specific message or specific story that was dear to our author. It's a vanity project, something that was put out to try to make sales and probably give a job to a bunch of friends. It sold 12,800 copies from what I gather, or so. So in those days, that would place it something in 115 range, something like that. And that was more or less laughable in the 1990s. Nowadays, this would make it a top-selling book on Indiegogo. If we look at modern authors and things like that on Indiegogo as an independent comic, like this is, selling 12,000 copies is almost unheard of. So you have to take that into consideration. And 12,800 copy is probably an half decent book from a mid-tier imprint right now. If IDW had books selling in the 12,800 copies range, they probably wouldn't be going under right now. That's just where we are as far as comics goes. So anybody telling you that comics is doing great, they are lying to you to your face. And I'm ready to say as well, anybody telling you that Comicsgate, Indiegogo, independent comics are doing great, they are not. They're surviving, but they're not doing great. Pacing is all over the place. That's one thing that's really bad about that comic. You can almost tell that the author had that particular feeling of, oh, I've got time. Oh, crap, I've only got one number left to actually finish the story. 88 pages split in 4 chapters. It's tiny. Most of comic book runs would be 6 comics long, so we'd be adding 44 pages to that. I don't know if it was cut short or planned in advance. I've got no real production history on this, no interviews that I can find about how this came to be. I have a feeling here that they were expecting something else when they started it, and it led to what we have. Sword's backstory is competently done, and his story is well done, but everything else in this book is rushed or could have been removed to improve the characters we actually have. This is a bit sad, but this is what we have here. This is a book where too much is tried at the same time, and we don't have enough room to play with. Stone's backstory, that one, as I said, really it's missing a lot of things. Got no backstory on the bad guy. All we know is that he's evil. The final fight itself is super rushed, just in a couple of pages. There's not real any gravitas to it. It just happens. At least, I will say it in this case, at least our main character is the one defeating the bad guy, which is a problem in modern comic, which we didn't have in those days. So I strongly suspect that they wanted to probably do a 6-book run on this, but once they saw the sales number and they saw the production that it went through, they just cut it down to 4 and cut and run. This is not a good comic book, okay? But it represents the 1990s, which I personally will call the golden age of American comics. I know golden age means something else to everybody else. It means those early comics there. But no, the real golden age of American comics is that period in the 90s where you had independent contractors trying things, self-taught artists going all out, products being sold by name recognition only, removing any form of code and any form of restriction on the artists due to image, and even DC and Marvel falling in that same kind of category, even though they still had limitations. They still went all out, created all sorts of characters. This is the period, the late 80s to the, let's say, late 90s. That period is when comics was truly thriving in the US. There's no demand to bring this story or those characters back. I mean, you have to look for it with Warchild comic Rob Liefeld if you really want to find it on Google. So it's not an easy thing to look for. However, could we do something with those characters? For sure. With an actually half decent writer, doesn't even need to be that good, and a competent artist, that would be the important part. You could be running this series over a year, 2 years, any length of times you really want, and reevaluate every 6 issues as an example. We've got mangas with a lot thinner of a premise out there. And my real final thought here, Rob Liefeld is a genius. Okay? Some people don't like his art style. Some people don't like his early art style, his later art style, anything of the sort. Some people don't like his takes. Some people don't like his taste in basketball teams. But he is a genius. And those kind of geniuses, like Rob Liefeld, create product out of sheer insanity every once in a while. They have those bubbles that pop, and they're like, yes, I want to do this, and they do it. That's the difference between a market analysis and creating either a product like this here, a vanity project, or even a project that you truly hold dear to your art, that you put out, and people either realize your genius by doing it, or they realize your genius by you've done it, and we're not sure why you did it. There are very few creators out there in the same caliber as Liefeld. So, hope you enjoyed this little review of an, I'm not even going to say a forgotten gem, because I don't think it's a gem, but a forgotten book. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Keep on reading comics, keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye bye.